have an important story to tell and you think you want to write a book? Well, since ancient times, storytelling has been a vital part of the African and African American communities. Through storytelling, questions were answered, history was conveyed, and lifelong lessons were taught and learned. For some, storytelling was the first opportunity for Black folks to represent themselves as anything other than property. Well, today I'm talking to three of the nation's most prolific and successful storytellers. New York Times bestseller and Oprah Book Club favorite Cynthia Bond is here. And later in the show, I go one on one with the co author of Steve Harvey's best selling book, Act Like a Woman, Think Like a Man, and one of the hottest children's books authors in the nation, Cozbi Cabrera, is here as well. All coming up next.
Live from Los Angeles, this is the Special Report.
A recent study published in the Journal of Cognitive Neuroscience suggests that the brain doesn't make a distinction between reading and hearing a story or even experiencing it in real life. I love this theory because when I read books, both fiction and nonfiction, particularly books by Black authors, the best ones flow like oral narrative. They lift themselves up off the page with rhythm and heart. A story told by a Black person, especially one who has roots in the South, could be about crossing the street. But it is never just about that. Somewhere there is going to be something about God, grits, blue lights, a basement. There's going to be singing and dancing, and I bet you there's going to be something about a wardrobe, fancy clothes, and probably a great big church hat. See, storytelling is the way Black folks have always said, we are here and we matter. I am asking some of the most successful authors in the country how they found their voices and what inspires their stories. For my leadoff panel is Cynthia Bond. She is a writing instructor, founder of the Blackbird Writing Collective, and the author of Ruby, a New York Times bestseller and Oprah Book Club 2.0 selection. Ruby is a love story about one woman's attempt to escape the legacy of violence in a small town in Texas. It's that and so much more. Cynthia's writing has been compared to celebrated authors Alice Walker, Toni Morrison, and Zora Neale Hurston. She's in the final stages of the manuscript on her second book, and she is joining us today. Good morning and welcome, Cynthia.
Good morning. Thank you so much for having me.
I am super, super excited to talk with you. It's Black History Month, and we know African American storytelling is such a part of our rich history. So I just want to ask you first, what inspired you to tell the story of Ruby Bell?
Well, my mother. Has always been an inspiration, and we grew up listening to her stories. She grew up on this very small town in East Texas, and she is beautiful and is very, very accomplished. She's 80 now, and is retired 3 times, but she had these little scars on her body from growing up on this farm, and we would point to the scars and we would ask her a question, and she would tell us these stories again and again and again. And that she was like our favorite chapter book. She was our favorite book as a kid. So she's the one who really inspired me. I'm glad she's writing now. She started her own blog and she's doing all kinds of stuff.
I love it. At 80 years old, I love it.
Uh-huh.
She's in her, you said her, not second act, but maybe this is her third act.
Oh, this would be her 4th act because she she retired literally once. They called her back. She retired again. They called her back last time. Now she's being a grandma and she's writing and she's pretty amazing.
I just love that. So in my intro, Cynthia, I said that Ruby is a love story, but I know that this book is about so much more. It deals with some really dark and difficult subjects, including, sexual and racial brutality of the 20th century, particularly, what was going on in East Texas. Can you just tell us, how was it writing about those topics, such difficult topics for most of us even to talk about and definitely to think about.
You know, the stories that we have to tell as Black people, as Black women, are not always pretty stories. They're not always, I mean, growing up as a Black woman in this country and the legacy of abuse that I went through, just the racism that you have to face on a daily basis. But my mother, you know, she grew up listening to, hearing about her aunt who was lynched. So there is a history, and uh, so the stories I tell people all the time, and I really encourage people to write their stories. And the most important stories are sometimes are the stories that are difficult to tell, and they're difficult sometimes to hear. But as a people, we have to bear witness
Mhm.
to each other's stories. And we have to be able to hear the stories that take us on all the roads that we have lived.
So I know you said that Ruby was inspired by your mother, but was there a character? Was there, an individual in your mother's past or in your family's past that, had the same experiences as Ruby? Without telling the whole book, but Ruby was sexually assaulted as a little girl.
Right. I mean, you know, I'm a fiction writer, which is a wonderful thing because I get to pull from this paint box of my experiences, experiences of things I've heard. I can take little bits and then I can very slowly paint an entire tapestry of a world. So yes, of course, some of those colors are from my experience. Some, you know, I was a social worker for about 20 years. Some are from the teens I worked with, some are from my family. It really is a tapestry. I think writing fiction, I often think of it like a loom. You are weaving all these strands together to create this tapestry. And that's really what Ruby was, and what the next book is going to be as well.
So, I was doing a deep dive on Ruby, and the praise for this book from like every segment of the literary world was just overwhelmingly positive. People critics were comparing your work to that of Toni Morrison, Alice
Mhm.
Walker, Zora Neale Hurston. I think I even read a critic who compared you to William Faulkner. And
Mhm.
someone said that this book should become, a classic, a must-read, a treasure. How did that make? Did you have any idea when you wrote Ruby that you would have folks comparing you to some of the the most acclaimed authors in this in the nation, really, past and present?
Yeah, no. Uh, I mean, the thing is, as a writer, it doesn't, sometimes, I mean, it's wonderful to hear all of that. But in the end, when it's time to write, you just sit down and it's you and a blank page or a blank screen. So while all of that is wonderful, and I, you know, people say wonderful things. People say, don't read your reviews sometimes, because sometimes you'll hear some things that really hurt. It's, you have to take it all. Just, you know, I'm a writer. I was a writer before I was published. I like to think of myself as a writer. I'm a writer now. I just get to um, make a living at it now, when I wasn't able to do that before.
And I'm so glad you make that distinction. Somebody may be thinking that because they haven't published a book, because they haven't had all the incredibly positive, critics reviews that you've had, that somehow that diminishes their story. And there is a difference, and I'd love for you to expand on that, between a writer and a published author. You can be both, and
Mhm.
you can still be a writer even if you haven't had that big literary contract that a lot of writers hope to get one day.
Yeah, I'm so glad you asked that. That's such an amazing question, because I think there are so many people who are sitting at home with a story to tell. And, I have a collective, Blackbird Writing Collective, and a writing group under that name as well. And the entire idea is harvesting stories. We, as a people, we have so many stories. Everyone has a story to tell. And the wonderful thing about writing is that there's a 13-year-old I know who's written a book, and you can be my mother who's 80, who's just starting to write. If you have a story, that story needs to be told. And because once you leave this earth, that story leaves with you. You are the only one who can tell the story you have in your heart, you have in your soul. So at any point, it is important to tell the story and write. Get your thing. I was writing at 5:30 in the morning before my daughter went to school. Find that time and write. Get a group of friends and decide you're going to work with them, meet with them once a week, and y'all talk about how much you wrote that day or that week. You do not have to be a published author.
Yeah.
Every writer you love at one point was sitting in a desk trying to think about what they were going to say.
Yeah. Now, I'm so glad you said that too, because one of my friends, an avid watcher of the show, I'll call her a recovering lawyer. We met, on our first job as lawyers, and I had Beverly Jenkins on the show. Beverly is this, amazing romance novelist, and she told me afterwards she's starting to think that she wants to start to think about writing, romance novels. So you're right that wherever you are, whoever you are, whatever you're doing, you can be inspired to start writing, whether it's romance novels or fiction or nonfiction. So I'm glad you made that point. I want to go back though to some of those reviews you've gotten, because again, they are just amazing. One I read from Ava DuVernay, and everyone knows who she is. She said that Oprah actually referred the book Ruby to her, recommended that she read Ruby. And she said that you have this majestic command of language, that you catapult everyday words into rare air with lines that sear into your memory. So I was like, whoa, okay, that's Ava DuVernay, who's read a lot of books, and has been around a long time. And, she had that to say about you. And let's talk about Oprah making recommendations about your book. I know that you were selected by Oprah 2.0. Your book was selected by her book club. What was that like? Like, how did you get the call from Oprah?
Oh my goodness. Well, I was teaching actually, and I just finished the class, and I stepped into the hall, and my phone rang just the minute, and I had just been talking about how important it is to follow your dream and write your story. It was a panel discussion, and I just finished that, and I walk into the hall and I get this call, and Oprah Winfrey is on the other end of the line. And the truth is, not for a moment did I think someone was pranking me, or it was her. And she told me I was the book club selection for that year. And I screamed in the middle of a huge, hallway. People thought I'd been hurt or something. And then we just sat and we talked. And she told me she loved my book. And then so that was one of those moments you're going to remember the whole of your life. It was a dream come true. Of course, I dreamt of being a big, book club selection. And she is really an amazing woman. What she did to create change in the literary world is just, she changed the landscape. And without her, my book would not have been in the public eye in the way it was. No way.
Yeah, she's responsible for selling over like 55 million plus books. So, and I think I read in the whole history of the 15 years of her book club, which started, when she had her Oprah Winfrey show, only like 70 authors, in the time of this book club have been selected. So you are in such a small and elite group of authors who have been blessed with the blessing of the Oprah Book Club selection process, because as you said, it can catapult your book into a whole nother realm, and give you notoriety and eyes on your book that otherwise wouldn't be there.
Right.
Did Oprah say though to you, what was it about the book? What captured her? What was that emotional pull for her, given all the books that she has an opportunity to select?
Right.
Why Ruby?
I think that she liked the fact, I think that she's a very brave, my doggy's walking around. So,
That's okay.
and now has decided that, he wants to go out. So I may just kind of let him do that. So I'm going to walk with you for a minute.
Okay.
Sorry. Oh my gosh. Oh my gosh. My alarm just went off. Oh my goodness. I'm so sorry.
That's okay. Everybody's at home, and we are
I
so
know. Hold
broadcast,
on. Let me do this.
live broadcasting, and any
I
you have
know.
children and dogs, you
Okay, we
know.
got it. I know. I was going to say you have a wonderful green room. It's great. It's got a nice fluffy bed, and it's got pillows, and it's got all my nice comforter. Anyway, so thank you for that little journey with me. So now you have to tell me what you
I was
asked.
just asking you what was the emotional pull for Oprah? Why your book?
Oh, right, right. I think, the book itself is a bit of an odd book. And I know that she had other books she was trying to decide. And I think the fact that I do deal with, it is ultimately a love story. It is a story about two people in love who overcome and conquer the most horrific and difficult odds. And I think the idea that this woman had walked through so much, I mean, her own private crucible, the fact that she walked through that and was able to survive. And also one of the things that she featured on Super Soul Sunday was a line I have, the audacious hope of rooted things. And they did a whole little section on that. And it's this idea that nature can inspire us. A plant never gets depressed and says it's not going to grow towards the sun. And we are like that too. I think ultimately our spirits are so strong, and we survive unimaginable things. And we get up, we get ready the next day, we live our lives, and no one knows the stories that live behind our eyes. And that's why ultimately it's about loving and being kind to one another because of that, because you do not know what someone has lived through the night before. We have, and those were some of the things that she talked about. But I think she really talked to me a lot about my writing, and the fact that she really loved my writing.
Yeah. Again, compared with some of the best writers in the country, so no doubt I could see where that appeal came from. I want to ask you though about your family. You are
Oh,
cousins with the late the civil rights icon Julian Bond, uh,
yes.
and so many other incredible members of the Bond family. I told you from St.
Uh-huh.
Louis, my good friend Candace, her dad was Dr. Les Bond, one of the first African American surgeons in St. Louis who made history. He was a civil rights icon in his own right,
Mhm.
even though he was a very prominent African American surgeon in St. Louis. What was it like, growing up in a family where so many folks were so super successful, not just successful, from a career standpoint, but people who were like changing,
The
the
world,
nation's history,
yeah.
who were working to, pave the way for African Americans, and working on such important issues such as civil rights.
I think one of the things that is so amazing is that as Black people, we come from so many walks of life. The Bonds went to college. Some of the Bonds went to college before the end of slavery. Berea College. Uh, that side of the family is as impactful to me as my mom as well. And Julian Bond used to visit the campus when we were kids, and my dad taught at KU, Kansas University, and he would do these speeches on campus. And so that side of the family is another few books. And I've recently started meeting since COVID, since we've all been shut in. And I did a writing workshop with my family, trying to get some of these family members to tell their stories. And we're starting to do that. But it was amazing that the legacy of the Bonds, that is, it's an amazing legacy.
Yeah, that's like a whole series. I mean, that's
It
like
really
a
is.
whole
That's a
thing.
whole other thing. Yeah.
Yeah, because I tell you, Dr. Bond was like, as a little kid growing up in St. Louis, he was bigger than life. And I didn't
Oh,
know
yeah.
him personally, but just, the image of him. So thinking about the little Black girls and boys, those of us who were like in housing projects, of hearing of this Black doctor. He had his practice on one of the street called Lindell in St. Louis, which is like
Wow.
Rodeo Drive or something in Beverly Hills.
Mhm.
And he was just this bigger than life character. So I can't wait till that book comes out.
Yeah, but we got my one, wish in life is, live long enough to tell all of my stories.
Yeah.
That's what I want more than anything. I've got so many stories to tell, and so many stories about the Black experience, growing up on rural South in East Texas and Louisville, Kentucky, and, and my grandmother who was just, the links and the sororities and the Jack and Jill, all of that, that's a whole other world. And yeah, so it's
Well, we heard Julian's name come up in the impeachment hearing. He
I
was
know.
mentioned by both the lawyers representing former President Trump, as well as Jamie Raskin, who's a classmate of mine from Harvard. Mentioned him quite frequently and talked about their friendship, and spoke so adoringly of your cousin. So it's just interesting, connections there. Before I let you go, though, I want to ask you about book number 2. So
Oh,
you
yes.
are busy working and writing book number 2. So tell us about that project.
Well, right now it's very late, but it will be turned into my publisher March 15th. And it's a continuation of the story of Ruby and Ephraim, but it also explores the Cafe Society of Black expatriates in Paris. It explores the world of white nationalism, quite honestly, and the KKK, and there's so many different elements. But I'm really down to. I haven't been talking to anybody, so hello. I've just been. I've
I'm
been
honored
locked
that you took
in
some
my
time out of your busy
office.
schedule.
Yeah, I've just been locked in my office, working. So it's been so nice chatting with you.
Well,
Really.
we look forward to having you back after that book drops. Is it expected to be out this year? I know you're turning.
No, it'll take a year, so it'll be out in 2022.
Okay, 22. All right. Well, I can't wait to get my hands on, part 2 of this story, and would love to have you back. Seems like such a timely novel, the topics that you're going to delve into in the second
Mhm.
half of this book. Thank you so much, Cynthia.
Of
What a
course.
pleasure to talk with you. So many mutual connections. Love
I
what
know.
honored that you would take some time out of your busy schedule. Keep writing, keep inspiring, and keep telling those important stories of our history. So, so necessary.
Thank you so much.
All
Thank you.
right. Take care. All
Uh-huh.
right. We are talking to trailblazing, prolific, and super successful writers. And that is just a partial way I can describe my next guest. She is definitely a trailblazing author and publisher. She has written and collaborated on over 30 fiction and nonfiction and youth literature books, six of which are New York Times bestsellers. She is the co author with comedian Steve Harvey of Act Like a Woman, Think Like a Man, She is the director of Denene Millner Books, which is an imprint of Simon and Schuster. She has a podcast called Speakeasy, and I could just go on and on about her incredible accomplishments. I'm so excited to welcome to the program this morning, Denene Millner. Good morning, Denene.
Good morning. Thank you so much for having me.
So first of all, I have to say you're going to win the prize this morning for like the coolest house, the coolest background. We're looking at your gorgeous art and your incredible interior. So first, I want to get that out the way.
Thank you. Thank you. My daughter drew that for me before she left for college.
Wow,
it's one of my favorite songs I used to play when I would cook dinner for them. It's Most Def's My Umi Says, Shine Your Light on the World. I just love that song.
Well, I like the song too, and I love the art even more. And one of the things when we broadcast from home is we get to have a peek into the homes of That's the people right. we are talking with. So we know you are a lover of music as well as art. But I have to ask you, fiction and nonfiction in children's literature. So when you think of one writer, you don't typically think of one writer having all of those kinds of books inside of them. So just tell us, I know you were a reporter, I know you were a super successful columnist, but what inspired you to start writing novels?
Oh, goodness. So I got into book writing in a really weird way. I was an entertainment journalist for the Daily News. And, when we were journalists back in the day, they would always tell you, you could do one thing, but not the other. So you could be a news writer, but you can't write for magazines. You could write for magazines, but you can't write for radio. You could write for radio, but not for television, and all around. And I just never allowed anyone to put me into that box. If you told me that I couldn't do it, then it was like, oh, okay, so I see what I have to do next. But with the book writing, I'd written a piece for the Daily News about this relationship book called The Rules. And it was by these women who were telling the world how to get a man and all the different ways that you had to act to get a man. And I didn't agree with it. So I wrote a story about it that said it was in the newspaper. I didn't know my editor was going to do this, but she illustrated it like a book, a mock book. And it said, Rules for the Sisters, Can Black Women Find True Love? And everybody in New York who read the newspaper that day thought that it was an actual book. And there was an editor who thought that it could be a book. And so by 3:00 that afternoon, I had my own book. And that's how I started writing nonfiction. And then I got tired of telling people all my relationship business. So then I started writing fiction. And so that's how I kind of got into the fiction space, with people telling me what I could and could not do.
Well, we love women, particularly Black women, that, tell us no, and then we say, wait and watch, right? So that's how that goes. Okay, now, I know you're tired of, telling people all your relationship business, but you've collaborated with like some of the biggest names in Hollywood to write these uber successful books. So, and one of them, obviously, Steve Harvey. That collaboration of, Act Like a Woman, Think Like a Man, not just became a best-selling book, but became this, multi-$100 million grossing big screen movie. How did that collaboration come about?
Oh, goodness. So I had just moved to Atlanta. I decided to make a go of being a full-time author and left. I was writing for Parenting Magazine and running a column for Parenting Magazine and writing a blog, mybrownbaby.com. But I worked with an editor who was looking for an Atlanta-based writer to write this book with Steve Harvey. He had pitched a book to her based off of his, he used to run this segment about relationships, the Strawberry Letter. And so he wanted to write a book, and he wanted an Atlanta writer, and I had just moved there to Atlanta. Okay. And so it was like, okay, I could do that. And, the rest is history. That book completely changed both of our lives. It changed his life and made him this international relationship expert who gives like this really sort of down home uncle, advice to women on how to deal with men. But it also opened the door for me to collaborate with celebrities in a way that I had started doing. I'd written Nene Leakes's memoir, and I did a couple of children's books with celebrities. But this opened the door for me to be able to write for sort of these A-listers that I didn't have the chance to write for before.
Yeah, again, anybody in Hollywood, that has a best-selling book, we should look for Denene Millner's name, because as I was researching, obviously, there was Taraji Henson, there was Cookie Johnson, there was Charlie Wilson, and the list goes on. And not just, big books like, Act Like a Lady, Think Like a Man, and the others that we've talked about, but books that have become movies. So I was looking at your your book that you co-wrote called The Vow, that then became this Lifetime movie called With This Ring, Jill Scott, Regina
Yes.
Hall, and Eve. So I know so many authors, a lot of my author friends, that's their dream. Write a book and then have it commissioned to become a movie. What is that? When you're writing these books, are you thinking this book would make a great movie, or does that just come later?
Oh goodness. So this story is going to make me cry, because it's phenomenal the way that it works for me. When I write books, particularly fiction, I can see the characters in my head. They talk to me, and I can have, I can be cute and put a little outline together and, say where the story's going to go. But the characters are playing in my head, and they're like, yeah, no, we're going to go right and down that street. And we're not even going to go over to that neighborhood that you had planned. When I was writing The Vow with my girlfriends, Angela Burt Murray, who now works at BET, she runs BET's digital platform, and Mitzi Miller, who now works for Rainforest Films, we wrote that book together, and all I could see in my head was Jill Scott. Honest to goodness, all I could see was Jill Scott. Jill Scott had an album that had come out right around the time when we were writing it in 2014 or so. And I kept seeing Jill Scott as this character. And so when I was writing it, I heard her voice. And we wrote it in 2005. Fast forward to 2015, who starred as Vivian, my character, was Jill Scott. And when I walked into the set to see her sort of acting out my words, I had this overwhelming feeling like the universe just really understood, what was to come of this book, and it manifested itself right there on the screen.
Wow, that's incredible. And thinking of, again, books and movies, Sparkle, Dream Girls. Did you write the books before they became movies, or the movies were first and then the books? How did that work?
So that one, again, came from Dawn Davis, who was the editor at, I forget if she was at HarperCollins at this point or Simon & Schuster, but the writers of the screenplays, Bill Condon for Sparkle, and who did Dreamgirls? But they had these scripts. And I was sitting literally on the beach on vacation, and I got a phone call from Dawn like, hey, so they want to write a book to sort of be a companion piece for these movies coming out. Like, are you down? And I said, sure. And she says, okay, well, you have to write this in 2 weeks. I want you to write this book in 2 weeks. So I was like, okay. So she FedExed the screenplay to me, and I literally wrote the novel based off of the screenplay. So the beauty of those books is that, the story was already set, the footprint was already there. So all I had to do was go in and sort of paint the color around the already existing story, which is a lot of fun, because then I get to fill in the blanks where you don't necessarily see it in the movie. So that was a lot of fun.
Is that a big part of what you do? Do you have, filmmakers, directors, producers contact you and say, hey, we have the screenplay for a movie, but now we want the companion piece of book?
It happened twice, and I'm not above doing it again and again and again. But
it was good work, huh?
Yeah, it was a lot of fun. I mean, I wrote both of those books, Dreamgirls and Sparkle, based off the screenplay. I think I did Sparkle in 2 weeks, and I did Dreamgirls in about 2.5 weeks, which is like a not okay, dog. Nope.
This is our morning.
All of our animals are acting up today, right? You be quiet. Right. Teddy he thinks he's Rambo, so he sits at the front door just waiting for people to walk by. Stop it. Stop. So, with those, it's a lot of fun to fill in those blanks. And for both of them, I actually had to do the research while I was writing. So, if you know the story of Sparkle, it's kind of loosely based on the Supremes, and Dreamgirls is kind of sort of loosely based on the Supremes as well. And so, it was learning about Detroit and Motown and sort of the 50s and the 60s and what it was like to be, a phenomenon at that time and during the civil rights movement, and what the music had to say and what the music didn't have to say, and all of that manifested itself in the personalities. So it's just really interesting to put my journalistic hat on and sort of dig into what the factual information was, and then to put my author hat on and sort of paint the picture with the colors.
All right, so now I got to talk about this imprint. You have an imprint with Simon and Schuster. Imprint focuses on African American children's book. I read you're only, one of 5 Black women. Well, no, you're the only woman that has African American children's imprint at one of the 5 big major publishing houses. Let me get that right. You are the only African American woman with an imprint at one of the 5 big publishers publishing in this genre. How do you go from, again, here you go, you're reporter, you're columnist, you're writer, best-selling author, and now you have your own imprint?
Yeah, you know what? I had a baby in 1990. I got pregnant with her in 1998, and she was born in 1999. And when I, got that sonogram goop off of my stomach and figured out that she was a girl, the first thing I did was go and buy a dress, a doll, a Black doll, a dress, and I went looking for books. And in the, the time, we didn't have Amazon. We couldn't just pick up our phone and buy books. You had to go to the bookstore. And at the bookstore, there was a dearth of books featuring Black babies and Black families and children. And so I came up with a few ideas of my own. And of course, I'm not saying that those books didn't exist. There were some out there. They were just very hard to find, like Andrea Davis Pinckney and her husband, Jerry, were doing a lot. And they actually just announced that they have their own imprint coming out of Scholastic that's going to focus on board books. And so, but in 1998, it was very difficult to find those books. And so I started writing some of my own, but I couldn't get them sold to the publishing houses. They just weren't feeling the kinds of stories that I had in mind. They tended to lean more towards stories about civil rights movement or sort of the history of Black people in America, slavery, Jim Crow, but the books that sort of talked about the everyday experience of Black children was still kind of hard to find. And so I couldn't get them to sign on to what I had in mind. So I just created my own imprint.
I love it.
And
I love it. I love it. And so you have this book called Early Sunday Morning,
yes,
which is, again, a story about a Black family doing, ordinary stuff.
yes,
Yes. Consistent with what you want to do, which is tell stories that Black folks, we're not all slaves. We're not, it's not all Jim Crow and slavery. Sometimes it's just getting ready for the church performance.
That's it. Getting ready for the church performance and understanding as Black folks what that entailed, right? Beyond getting your shoes and your dress together and your robe together Saturday night, your mom doing your hair Saturday night and pressing it out or cornrowing it, and then going to church the next day and perhaps going to Sunday school the flip side to that was that there was a community built around Black children in the church. And so, there was the moral code that was instilled in us, but there was also this ability of grown folks to give Black children wings. And that's what I wanted to focus on in Early Sunday Morning, the importance of community to Black families, and how wherever we went, no matter what we went through, when we would walk through those church doors, adults stood around waiting to give Black children wings. And so that's what Early Sunday Morning is about. It's about a little girl who is experiencing her first time singing a church solo. She's super nervous, and the whole community comes together to tell her, look, baby, you got this. Sing, go ahead and sing, baby, you got this. And right. She does. And, and that's based on me as a kid. That was my experience as a child. And I couldn't find that experience in a book. I lived it, but it would have been nice to see it in a book. And so I wanted to create the opportunity for children to see that part of their lives in the book.
So I know this is the first book, right, under your new imprint with Simon and Schuster?
It was the first one. So Denene Millner Books was started at a different imprint, a small imprint out of Chicago called Agate Publishing, and then I moved it over to Simon and Schuster. Simon and Schuster created all of these opportunities for the imprint to really just kind of fly in terms of marketing, promotion, production. There's a team there that really has this amazing way of getting books produced and out into the world. And so one of the first books that I was able to do at Millner Books was Me and Mama, which is, and you're going to have Cozbi on in a little bit, and her book it won 2 huge awards just 2 weeks ago, one a Caldecott honor and the other one a Curtis King honor, and I'm super proud of that. And so moving to Simon & Schuster helped create that opportunity for all of us to fly.
Well, I told Cozbi that I told one of my friends who's a children's book author that she was coming on, and she's like, oh my God, she's the biggest thing in children's literature. So I'm super excited that Cozbi, is coming on, as you said. But the fact that you, Denene, created this vehicle at Simon & Schuster, been in the news a lot over some, nonsense with Josh Hawley, but still one of the biggest publishers on the planet, that you, Black woman, that you have an imprint there, and then you can publish someone like Cozbi. That's Black history, like magic. I mean, that is like gold.
And it's my heart's joy. Like, as a creator, I know what it's like to have people say no to things that, when they're out into the world, they'll mean something to somebody, right? And so with the imprint, it's not just about creating stories about Black children that celebrate their humanity. That's a huge part of it. But another huge part of it is creating these opportunities for people who look like me and have stories like mine to be able to tell those stories, get paid what they're supposed to be paid for those stories, and be able to create the images that they wouldn't necessarily get to create elsewhere. And so I'm super proud of that too.
I'm going to bring Cozbi on. She's just waiting in the green room. I had this whole major introduction for her, but I just think it's so perfect for her to come on with you, Denene. Cozbi, you can hear us, right? Good morning. So Cozbi Cabrera, as Denene just told her, has this award-winning book out, Me and Mama, about a young girl's relationship with her mother. She's not just a writer, she's an illustrator, she's a doll maker, she's a fashion designer, she's like all things creative. So Cozbi, you are on, I'm imagining, like this incredible high after learning that you've won these 2 prestigious awards for your novel, Me and Mama. But tell us what it's like working with this powerhouse, Denene Millner.
Just amazing, because the reality of the matter is it's not us as individuals with our creativity. There's an entire ecosystem, and the ecosystem determines where the book will land. We've been storytellers from the beginning of time. The question is, we come from a very strong oral tradition, and the reality of the matter is our children need to hear these stories. They need to find themselves in the story, because stories is how we make sense of the world, it's kind of like, you need the eye to see what is possible in order to sort of like bring it through the funnels to allow it to land. And so Denene is uniquely posited and in just amazing position to do that. And also she has the sensitivity. It's like there are things that are kind of like DNA deep, that we have no explanation for, that have traveled through our bloodlines and that show up to this day. So she's got all of that and more. So she definitely is a gift to the ecosystem.
Yeah. So I know for you, Cozbi, you worked for 15 years in the music industry. You were designing and creating like album covers. Those of us who have albums probably have one of your albums.
My dream job, really. And then even in that arena, it's like there were very few Black art directors. I mean, I remember knocking on a door and being told, "No, you're not going to get let in because." It's like you don't exist in this arena, people that look like you don't exist in this arena. So, it's like, it's the age old, be better than, do more than deliver more than just to even sort of like get through the door.
So both of you sitting there, award-winning authors, super successful, using your voice, finding your voices, and being creative tellers. But there's so many people, Denene, who say they want to write a book, who've talked about writing a book, who feel like they have an incredible story, but they just can't get that first sentence on paper or on that computer. What do you say to those people who are motivated, but yet they can't find the right level of motivation to start the process?
Oh goodness. So it's talk it through. For me, a big thing that I do when I just can't, when I sit down to the computer and I can't find the words in my fingertips on the page, I'll talk it through literally. I'll put a tape recorder to my mouth and just start telling stories. And then I'll listen back to it and then put it onto the page, and then it starts making sense and it starts growing and the colors start getting brighter and sharper. And so, if you can't figure out where to start, it's just start, right? It's just put a word down, tell a story, call your friend up and tell your friend a story. And then that becomes the beginnings of your storytelling. And then the other thing to that is, study people's writing, read all the time. I have stacks and stacks of books that I'm constantly just sort of ripping through, because a game recognizes game. And, you look at these words that people create, and you look at the storytelling, you look at the structure, you look at the language, and these are the ways that you learn how to do it on your own. It's an easy thing to do, is to just study the greats.
Yeah, I love that. Game does recognize game. And obviously you recognize that in Cozbi. And Cozbi, your first book, My Hair is a Garden, about natural Black hair, about little girls having to deal with their hair and recognizing that their hair is not a chore, but that their hair is something, to be proud of, and that Black natural hair is beautiful. I just wonder, how is a book like that resonating today? In this world we find ourselves in, the civil unrest that we saw in the summer, the hypersensitivity around race, the focus, around being an anti-racist and embracing African Americans. Do you find that this book, is even more appropriate today than maybe even when you first wrote it?
I think so. It's really interesting because children need to find themselves in literature, especially our earliest readers. We have this expression, know thyself. It's like that is really the beginning of all knowledge attainment, is to first know yourself. And the container that we come in, it's like this container, there's so much we can take in if it's got holes in it. Holes that we love on our children, and then we send them out into the world. And oftentimes, that world is actually bullet written, bullet written with lack of acknowledgement, of erasure, of all the things that a lot of, beautiful, bright and shining little kids experience just going into the kindergarten room. It's like we don't know if the teacher will even see them. And that's just such a message. So, it's so important that children, all children, not just our children, because if you want to impoverish a child, what do? You limit their exposure to people that don't even look like them, or exposure to people who look like them and like to not have that be present, in the literature. So I think it's just critical if we're talking about a human family, and the fact that we have to occupy space on this earth and try to figure out how to get along. It's like, let us look to our children, and let's not stilt them by erasing, what is so beautiful, really.
No, really powerfully said. Denene, so now I'm going to ask you, put your publisher's hat on. Is this a moment in history where African American authors, you think, have opportunities, more opportunities than perhaps they have ever had in the past? Because I know, again, a lot of authors struggle finding literary agents. I probably, took me a year or two before I wrote my first book to find an agent. And then, actually getting your book sold into a major publishing house, which there are lots of ways to publish. That's not the only way. But, is this our moment in terms of Black authors?
I can honestly say absolutely. The publishing industry understood what was going on in the streets during the summer of last year, right? And they saw how folks all across the world, internationally, were shouting from the rooftops, hey, Black Lives Matter, man, you gotta get it together. And doors opened. People were able to find agents. Agents were able to send out proposals and find book deals with, publishers that maybe wouldn't have been as quick to open their arms and their doors to them. So I definitely see that. What I'm hoping, though, is that, that translates into sales, that translates into reviews, that translates into an embrace by the industry to actually put the marketing and promotion behind the books so that people can actually find them and know that they exist. So it can't be just, oh, okay, well, we went on ahead and we got, 20 book deals for Black folks, and the same ecosystem that Cozbi was talking about looks the same way that it did in 2019. It has to grow itself up and stir in the colors into every part of the industry, not just I bought 20 books with Black people and so now I'm done. It can't be that.
Right. I want to ask you, Cozbi, I couldn't interview you without talking about your beautiful handmade Black dolls. Again, when you look Cozbi Cabrera up on the internet, you're going to not only find her amazing books, but you're going to find her work of art in these dolls that are now collected around the globe, including by famous folks such as Oprah and Martha Stewart. Is the making of those dolls, how do they relate to the characters that you create in your book?
Yeah.
In the books that you've written about children?
I started making the dolls because I was going to antique shows, and a lot of the Black dolls I saw were not made in love, and in the same way, a lot of stories that have been told about us historically have not been told in love. So there's a difference in delivery when something comes from a place of love. And so I even left my job because I felt so strongly that if the earth should close up tomorrow and all we could find from an anthropological point of view, all we could dig up from the earth were these awful dolls that were oftentimes made as stereotypes. And those are the only things that I could find as a trace evidence that I had walked on this earth and all the beautiful people I know that look like me had been here. I said, I would not be happy with that. So I just set my hands to work on creating these dolls. And they are done. They're done in love in quite the same way, that the characters, that are in my stories, I see them through eyes of love.
Beautiful, absolutely beautiful. Okay, Miss Denene, what's next? You've got a full plate. You are, just killing it in the literary field. Obviously, I know you have a podcast. You're a talk show host. Your fiction, nonfiction, children's literature. What's next for Denene Millner?
Well, when I get off of this call with you, I am going to sit down again and get back to my own writing for myself, which I haven't done in a very long time. I'm in the middle of writing a novel. It's called The Beautiful Blood. It's going to be published by St. Martin's Press in 2022. I'm super proud of it. It's about motherhood told from 3 different perspectives: a birth mother who had her baby taken away, the adoptive mother who adopted that baby, and then the child herself, and sort of the motherhood journey that they share, feminism, racism, and how they go about learning to love their families and raise their children in the midst of all of that. So I'm super excited about that. It's hard. It's probably the hardest thing I've ever done. And that's saying a lot, but it's telling that story.
Why is this story so hard for you?
Because it's really based on my own story. I'm a child of adoption. Don't know much about my birth mother, don't know anything about my birth mother, and was raised by an incredible woman who never once made me feel like I didn't come from her loins, but who lived a really tough life and made a lot of mothering decisions based off of what happened to her as a child. And then, my motherhood journey, though I respect the way that my mother raised me and loved her, she passed away in 2002. There were things that I just had to change for myself because I wasn't growing up with the same kind of pain that she was. I was growing up with my own pain. And so how that manifests and how you mother a child, is something that I'm learning a lot about myself while I research and think about, things that happened to me as a child, things that happened to my mother as a child, things that may have happened to this Black woman who had a baby in 1968 and was at a young age and was forced to give her up for adoption. What does that look like for Black women in particular? Because they're not in the stories of adoption. We're not in the stories about pain and suffering and how that manifests itself in motherhood. When you talk about Black mothers, you talk about pathology, but you don't necessarily talk about the love that we have for our children and what it takes for us to get there. And so it's tough. It's a hard story to tell, but I'm super proud of it. I'm super proud of it.
Wow, I'm just sitting here thinking, so moved by that, thinking of Natasha Trethway. I had her on, and she told in her recent book, she goes back and tells the painful story of her mother being in an abusive relationship and being killed by her father and her husband, Natasha's mom, being killed by her husband, and just that experience and how painful it was, but how necessary it was for her to finally confront and deal with that pain that she had kind of buried away. She becomes this poet laureate, just nation's, just darling as a poet, but really hadn't dealt with that trauma.
Yeah.
So hats off to you for, being willing to expose yourself, in such a vulnerable way. And as you say, tell the stories of Black women and motherhood in a way that we don't often see told. I'm seeing a book, not just a book, but a movie. I don't know. I'm looking at characters in my brain right now because I feel like that's got to be a movie. And I won't ask you. I need a whole nother hour to ask you who are the characters that are, already racing in your brain that play these mothers and daughters. I know you're thinking about it.
Let me tell you, it is vivid. It is vivid. And if it comes to pass, whoo, girl, it's going to be a heck of a movie.
It's coming to pass because you don't even deal in world of no's, so I'm not even worried about that. Final word for you. What would you tell a young girl out there with a story to tell that has something inside that's burning? What would you say to that young girl?
I would say, because I think of myself at 9 years old, and I wanted to write a novel at 9. And every summer I took the typewriter out of the linen closet and cranked in the onion skin. And then I stopped. I only got as far as the title because I thought, well, I haven't sat in the tall prairie grass and I don't have any campfire stories. And I just thought that everything that had been written that I had read was the stuff that was worthy. And so I say, tell your story, even your everyday granular, even the moments when you feel your soul has been nourished or watered or fed. It doesn't have to be an incredible arc. Just begin to tell your story and don't get judgy as you're telling it. Because that's what's
good advice. Don't get judgy. That's probably the hardest thing we can do as humans, is to discipline ourselves to not be judgy. Denene Millner, Cozbi Cabrera, what an amazing morning I have had. You ladies have set my soul on fire. I've written 3 books. I have a 4th one. I'm working on a 4th book that's coming out in August. I'm more inspired now to go and finish that book. And I just love you for what you're doing. I love the messages that you are, disseminating out into the world. You are showing African-American girls and women that we are here, that we matter, and that We can set this world on fire. So again, thank you so much for joining me this morning. Denene, I'm calling you, girl. We're going to write a book together.
Please do. It's my heart's joy. Thank you so much for having us. This is a beautiful platform. Thank you for opening your heart to us and our work.
Yes, Areva. Thank you. Thanks for having me.
What an inspiring morning. You guys know I love it. I love it. I love it. I love it when I get to talk to just super intelligent, smart, powerful, take no prisoners, Black badass women. And this morning we had 3 of the baddest ass Black women on the planet joining me this morning. So I am super excited. Sitting down with these women, talking about carrying on the tradition of our ancestors and telling those stories that matter, and getting paid in the process. All right, y'all, some words of goodbye before I get out. The late distinguished congressman from Georgia, the iconic civil rights leader, John Lewis, famously said, "The movement without storytelling is like birds without wings." See, Black folks come from a long line of storytellers, stories from lynching and segregation to presidents named Obama and youth poet laureates named Amanda. They are the ties that bind. So no matter who you are or where you come from, you have a story to tell. From the recipes handed down to you from your grandmother and great-grandmothers to your most difficult and painful experiences with a partner, a child, or a parent, you have borne witness to unique experiences that give you a unique voice. See, I found my voice when my son Marty was diagnosed with autism, and several years after his diagnosis, I wrote my second book, The Everyday Advocate. Some years later, I wanted to share my experiences in the media and help people find their voices, so I wrote Make It Rain. Powerful women like my guest today and the thousands of women who are still trying to find their places in the world have inspired my 4th book, Awakening, out this August. Whether your story becomes a book or part of an oral tradition you share with others, that's really up to you. But we have all been through something. We've all been through some stuff. And sharing that something might just be the basis for the next best New York Times blockbuster book or a blockbuster movie. You decide. I'm out, y'all. Be safe out there. Don't forget to wear your mask, and don't forget we are all in this together.